I've got a motion path here, and what I've done, if I hit U on the keyboard, I've selected all of these and hit Rove across time, and that spreads the keyframes evenly across the motion path. So you can see all these little dots are spaced the same distance from each other. And what that does is it gives me a solid base to work from so that I can remap that timing with CurveConductor. So let's do that right now. I'm actually going to go into the Advanced tab here, and I can shrink this by hitting S so I can see more of what we're dealing with. So we've got several buttons under the Advanced tab. So I've got Apply to Selected Keys, the ability to span a selection which has more than 2 keys with a curve. I have the ability to apply one curve between every 2 keyframes on a property, and it just automatically puts those in there. And then I also have the ability to remove specific curves. So starting out here, we're going to use span selection with curve. So I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to curve. I don't have a control layer yet, so I'm going to, it'll just automatically create one. I'll just start with smooth ease up here, and I'm just going to go ahead and span the selection with curve. Here's what we got. We've got our keyframes for that one curve, and now they're actually driving the timing of the entire motion path. So 0 to 100 slider is driving the entire motion path timing. So this teal marker or cyan marker here is for labeling purposes only. This doesn't drive anything in the expression. That's opposed to, in contrast to marker mode. The way that this expression works is it tracks keyframe indices. And so that allows us to be able to take more than 2 keyframes and span a control curve across that entire number of keyframes, rather than just between every 2 keyframes. Okay, so a couple gotchas here. One is that if you're going to add or subtract a keyframe from this motion path, for example, the expression is already counting keyframes, and I believe there are 9 keyframes here. And so if you add a keyframe, say, to right here, this area, it's actually going to throw off every subsequent keyframe indices. It's going to be, instead of 3, this will become 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So in order to get around that, what we have here on the control panel are add keyframe, subtract keyframe buttons. And so what that'll do is it'll update the expression so that it becomes non-destructive. Now it's added another keyframe here, but the expression has updated, so we still end at the end of the curve rather than ending one keyframe before, which is what would happen if we added a keyframe the traditional way. So if I want to remove a keyframe, it's the same process. Just hit this remove keyframe button, and it'll, after having selected the keyframe, it'll remove that. Okay. Now this add subtract keyframe gotcha does not apply to adding and subtracting keyframes from the control curves themselves. So now let me just sculpt this timing a little bit. I would like it to kind of speed up as it goes down, and then slow down as it rises back up, and then speed up again until it kind of has, by its own momentum, it sort of finishes. And then I think I'll have it overshoot before it lands. So let's go do that. I'm just going to go ahead and open this here. So we're going to start out a little bit slow. Then we're going to, the first time we slow down, we need to be kind of up here, maybe just before the top. Then I'm going to flatten this curve out and see what that looks like. Okay. Yeah, so kind of, it just sort of slows down, and I can make some changes here. And then I think at about here, I want it to sort of have a kind of a regular slope where it's sort of at the same speed for a little while. maybe it speeds up a little bit. And then I kind of want it to rush into the end of the animation and overshoot. So I'm going to create another keyframe there, drag this above 100 on the slider. And what that'll do is it's actually extrapolating the motion out towards the direction. So look at this. The end keyframe is right here, and the square is going to go past that and then back up. Okay, so let's see. Here we go. Yeah. So it kind of comes to a stop quickly. I think what I'm going to do is, sculpt this motion even more. Comes to a real smooth stop. Yeah. See how that is looking. Definitely could use some more work. But you get the idea of how we're able to use one slider curve to drive the timing of a motion path with many different keyframes. So let's say I have a property where I've already developed a curve that I actually really like, and I would like to capture this curve for use elsewhere in my comp. So I'm going to select the keyframes I want to capture, which happen to be these 4. And this very nice, look at how the tangents are touching. It's very geometric, I guess. So let's see, up here, I'm going to make some space, and I'm going to click this button, create curve from selection. And what that does is it applies a new curve to my control layer, and here it is normalized. So the other one had some sloping happening, but when the curve is captured, it goes ahead and normalizes those numbers so that I can use it effectively. And you can see the way it's normalized, these tangents are still touching. So the relationship between this, the intermediate keys is retained, even though the velocity matching has been removed for the purpose of normalization. All right, so that's how that works. So then I can move that, take that curve profile and apply it to other layers in this comp. All right, we're moving even more in the weeds here with this tool. Let's go ahead and just right off the bat, open the graph editor. Dimensions have not been separated. And it's one of the great things about this tool is that we're able to apply curves across motion paths in a way that would be really difficult to do when the keyframes and the spatial positions are, and the keyframe easing is all so intertwined. So that's kind of what this tool is addressing, is the ability to separate spatial position from curve profiles, timing profiles. So I'm going to just go ahead and start using some of these buttons here. I'm going to turn off. I noticed that velocity matching is on. Definitely want to turn that off. This will very much affect how curves get applied. And so if you ever are applying a curve with this tool and it's not looking right, definitely check that first thing. See if it's trying to apply a velocity matching where you don't want one. So this first one, I'm going to use smooth ease. And again, we don't have a control layer yet. So I'm going to go ahead and it's just going to automatically make that when I select this. I'm going to apply to selected keys and it creates a control layer. So I'm going to go back to the property I'm modifying and I don't see anything yet, but if I preview it, the curve has been applied. So I'm just going to turn on this expression graph. One thing to note is that when these expression graphs are on, it can actually slow down work in the viewport quite a bit in the timeline. So it's a little less snappy as I'm dragging these keyframes around. And that is not due so much to the actual expression itself and its impact on the animation. It's due to the fact that After Effects is actually calculating a lot visually for this graph in the background. So if you find that it's getting slow, you can turn these off and then things should be very snappy. even though it's still applying the expression. Okay, so I'm actually going to turn this back on though for now because I want to see what I'm doing. So I've got one curve applied. The second one, I'm just going to go to presets and turn off marker mode because we're not in marker mode. We're in keyframe indices mode. And I'm just going to do anticipate plus overshoot. Where is that? Right here. So I'm going to click on that. And after selecting the keyframe segment I want to impact, and you can see that it's adding those values there. So it does that. And then immediately we go into another segment here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another smooth ease, select that in this drop down and just apply it between those two keyframes. But after, I want it to drift because it's just moving from this point to this point. So I'm going to have velocity match end, which is the end of the segment I want matched. So click the button, and as it transitions, here's what it looks like so far. There we go. So then it kind of zooms into this, drifts, and then I have 3 keyframes, 1, 2, 3, and I want to take one curve and apply it across all those 3. So I'm going to turn back on the expression here. I'm going to select the keyframes I want to span, which is 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to use this button, span selection with curve. And the curve I want to use, I'll just use smooth ease again. And velocity matching is on. And I actually want it on. I want it on because it's transitioning from After Effects native animation here. And I want it to transition back into native animation here. So I'm just going to do start and end. And go down here, span selection with curve. So you can see how it's applying that curve. It's easy to see here on the Y coordinates and on the graph, but you can actually see it take After Effects native animation and it retains the shape, but it uses that timing profile across all 3 keyframes. There we go. Back into, so it's velocity matched. And then we've got 2 keyframes here. So I'm going to do that again, start and end velocity matching, and then I'm just going to click apply to selected keys. And once again, there we go. So this is a kind of per keyframe segment way of using the tool. What I'm going to show you now is where you sort of start by applying one curve across every 2 keyframes, and then you can kind of pick and choose from there what you want to do. So let's go into that. I'm going to go ahead and just select this property or select these keyframes. And then I'm going to click this button, apply to all keys on selected property. And what that does is it applies a curve between each of the segments here. And what it did was actually do it with velocity matching turned on. So that's not gonna work very well. So I'm gonna just select those again, turn velocity matching off, and then hit the button again. There we go. Okay, so a couple cool things that happen. So I'm using that one curve. So if I add more to this animation, it's going to automatically apply that curve once again, because that's the default curve on this property. So what I can do is now make exceptions to that default. So for example, I can remove a curve by selecting some keyframes and then hitting this button here, remove curve from selected keys. So now, this way I can transition in and out of native After Effects animation. But contrary to marker mode, this mode has some functionality that the other doesn't, and that is blending. So if I click on the control layer, I can see here that we've got our default curve as this smoothies profile. That's been applied to this layer as the default curve. So it's also got this smooth ease blend, and that's basically saying here's a value for curve blending that's applied by default. So this blend is applied by default. I can adjust that here by selecting a specific junction keyframe and then picking a specific curve overlapped amount and then hitting apply blend. So I could do that on a per junction basis, but rather in this particular case, I want the same blending between each of these curves. So watch what happens when I increase blending. Those curves, you can see the first 2 or 3 segments there the curves are getting stretched into the next move. And so that gives you can do the snappy animation, smooth, snappy animation, where you don't have to wait for one curve to fully finish before the other one takes over. So this is one of those features that doesn't really exist in the marker-driven mode. By the way, if you're dragging these keyframes around and now all the labels are off, you can go up to Utilities and select this button here, Update Markers, and it'll just pop them into the spots where they are actually being used. Okay, so what happens now if I make more animation here is the last keyframe. Now this curve is being stretched, and do it once again. So this default curve blend is actually applying to all the curves on the layer that are default curves. So I can set that there to like 42. And then if I want to, I can always select a keyframe segment and I can go up to, say, another curve and apply that between those. So yeah, it's actually still blending because that new curve is still just using the default blend because I haven't given it a different blend to use, which is great. But I can change the blend if I want to. I can select these keyframe junctions, say I want no blending here and no blending here, and I can just go up to the blend 0 and then just apply 0 blend. So now this curve no longer has blending. It just sort of sits on its own. And if I want, I can add blending back in. In fact, if I hit this minus remove blend, it should actually go back to using the default. So that's the way to modify blending. So if I want 0 blend, then just apply 0 blend. If I want the default blend after I've applied 0, then hit the minus button. Okay, one more thing that I want to show you, and that is this feature which allows you to actually go direct to keyframes from a control curve. So we don't have a control curve in the layer, but let me use anticipate plus overshoot. I like that. So here's the animation I have. I'm going to go ahead and just make these linear just so you can see. They can be anything, but so I'm going to take those two. I just want it to go from point A to point B with this curve profile. So I'm going to, and we have some velocity drift that I want to match. So I'm going to do start and end velocity matching. And then I'm going to go up to direct to keys, check that box. And so I'm going to apply this curve to here. And I'm just going to do it with apply to selected keys. And there we go. It actually has not created a control layer or anything. It's just applied it directly to keys. This works really well for scalar values, like a one-dimensional value. It works okay for motion paths, but this is definitely where it excels. And as you can see, it retained the velocity matching. If you continue to use this tool elsewhere and you're like, man, it's acting really funny. I had mentioned before checking velocity matching, which is important. So turn that off if you don't want to be using that, but also unchecking direct to keys, because obviously if that's on, then it's going to be trying to apply your curves directly to keyframes. Well, let's say that I am actually using the curve control expression driven curve here. So direct to keys is off, velocity matching is off. That's good. Actually, I want velocity matching on start and end. So I'm going to I'll just do it through marker mode. I'm going to add this curve marker. What it's done is it's taken that bit here using velocity matching. Now you can see it's actually tried to apply the curve twice, which is exactly how it's supposed to work, but I need to add this N for native. Go back to the graph editor and you can see it only adds this one curve, which is great. That off. So this is really the more truly procedural way to use the tool rather than direct to keys. But let's just say you've got some properties here and you want to bake them down to keyframes. You can do that by selecting the area you want to bake, and then you can come over to utilities and hit this button here, bake to keys, and there you go. So we've got the expression's been removed because it no longer applies to this particular layer, but you've got a velocity matched curve that's gone direct to keys.